If you love creating adventures for your gaming table, maybe this thought has crossed your mind. What if I were to write this down and just share my work? Could I even get paid for it? Tell them, Winifred.
You absolutely can.
Sometimes you just need to hear things from the haunted doll. And maybe I can help you get started. I'm Val, and over the years, I've written quite a few adventures for publication. I wrote a bunch of them as a freelance writer for a TTRPG studio, and now I just write kind of on my own as part of what I do on this channel. And I learned a lot in the process. Because when you've been writing for your players, making the jump to writing for publication, turns out it's a whole different beast. But a beast we can vanquish, with the right weapons and the right training. I'm on level with you, this is a huge topic. But if you're a fledgling diving into the wondrous world of module writing, or simply curious about it, the goal today is to give you a good place to start. So how does one even write specifically for publication? So get comfy, grab yourself a warm drink, and let me give you the first pointers you'll need to structure and write your first module. And also maybe a little background on how I got started. The year was 2021, a chilly morning in Normandy, France. A dark time in a remote countryside, civilization struggling following a dreadful plague. And what was I doing back then? Absolutely nothing of significance to the TTRPG world. I'm not giving you that backstory for no reason. I'm giving it because I think it's incredibly relevant that I wasn't of any relevance to TTRPG studios.
Well, it's not like you're relevant now.
Thanks, Winifred. What I'm saying is, that proves that it's possible to get into it even when you've got no connections and no previous work. There are people who have been doing this for decades, who are full-time employees for big TTRPG studios, and I am not one of them. Chances are, neither are you, and that doesn't have to stop you. So how'd it happen? A friend of mine sent me a link that she found on social media for French TTRPG studios that was looking for new freelance writers. So I wrote a brief outline for an adventure according to the guidelines they gave, sent it to them, and they commissioned me to write it. Like I said, I didn't have any experience writing for publication. It's not like you can take TTRPG writing and publishing as a major in college, which would be awesome, but also that would require a world that the gods haven't forsaken, and that's not quite where we're at. So I got trained on the job. The guidelines provided gave me the basics so I could turn an idea into a workable draft. Then proofreading and editing gave me feedback to improve via trial and error. I got paid for my work, and after that first gig with them, they added me to their roster of freelancers. And I ended up writing a bunch more adventures for them. Down the line, I also tried my hand at coordinating a little collection of adventures, proofreading, coordinating, and editing other people's text. That was so valuable. It's incredible practice at sharpening your eye. Practice is the best teacher, but observation, analysis, and reflection sure don't hurt. I stopped writing with that studio eventually when I got a full-time job and didn't really have time anymore, but alas, it was too late. I had developed a taste for it. So a couple years later, when I started the channel, I used what I learned to write a few adventures that I put online, even though I didn't have a whole team behind me. My team consists of me, my laptop, a corkboard, and one very disagreeable haunted doll, and occasionally some real good friends. But I got to experiment with new things, and over time refine my process a bit, and live happily ever after. The end.
You make me cringe.
And you make me homicidal. Now let's talk about you. Whether you're interested in putting your work online, or if you want to someday try getting work from a TTRPG studio, it's good to start developing them skills. And your transformation begins with one mindset shift. I'm about to add a new deity to your pantheon. Game masters already worship the avatars of storytelling, immersion, and engagement. But when you write for publication, there's a new god you must learn to serve. She goes by the name of ergonomy. If you're unclear on what that means, ergonomics really is a fancy word for the study of how people use a certain space, object, or product, in order to facilitate its use, remove obstacles, and make it all run as smooth as possible. So here, thinking about how a GM actually interacts with the module, both in terms of gameplay, but also as an object itself. Maybe as a GM, your own notes are scribbled on a napkin or fractured across 40 different Word documents. I get it. We drink the same poison, friend. But for publication, ergonomy is a priority. It is the being that guides our decisions. When writing for publication, beyond creating a story, you're creating a guide for another GM to run that story. The text you create is a tool for a game master, and the tool needs to actually be usable. So what makes a good tool? Game masters are juggling a million things while running the game. How I haven't had an aneurysm in the middle of a session is beyond me. Even if I've probably read the adventure before running it, in the heat of the moment, I need to be efficient.
The best thing you can do is to picture that the person reading your module is Distressed Dimitri.
Distressed Dimitri is running a game at 2 AM. He's had 4 beers, he's trying to DJ soundtrack for the game, while running a combat encounter for a table of 6 players who are all competing for his attention.
And in this very moment, Distressed Dimitri is reminded of his doctor's words about how he should watch his stress levels.
We cannot add more stress to the plate of Distressed Dimitri. If he needs to look up something in your text, he should be able to find it within seconds. To give you an idea, here's a few quick things that might illustrate a bit better how we help Distressed Dimitri survive being a game master. dividing everything into sections and subsections, and naming those titles right. Just by seeing the title of a text box, the stress dimetry should be able to tell immediately what's in it. In a similar vein, using different colors or bold text to highlight important information inside a chunk of text. Letters in bold will easily draw his eye to the DC of a skill check within a split second, without needing him to read the whole paragraph, putting all the information related to the same topic in the same spot. The GM shouldn't have to flip through the pages to locate the different pieces of the same puzzle. And of course, keeping it short. The more concise you are, the less time and effort it takes to make the session happen. That was barely scratching the surface. And I keep trying out new things with each project. But that should be enough to communicate why it guides every single decision we make ever. Okay, so let's make some decisions. How do you know if an adventure idea is good for publication? It depends on your goals, but personally, I want my adventures to be versatile and adaptable enough that a GM could easily plug it into their game. And for that, I have a few criteria I try to follow. Neutral settings and locations, for example. Adventures that can be set in any town or city, or that could take place while traveling in the wilderness of any region. I wrote an adventure called The Swallows Fly Low, and it takes place in a haunted theater, but like a GM could place that theater anywhere they want. Come to think of it, it could even be a traveling circus if that made more sense for their game. Also, I only add in world building and lore that's necessary to the adventure. First, because the more lore I add, the harder it is to integrate into an existing game. And maybe also the less room it leaves for the GM to make it their own. But also because I firmly believe that the less time it takes to explain the background information to the players and the sooner we can jump into playing, the better. Though this is not the only approach, and going more specific has its merits. Like genre-driven adventures giving the group an opportunity to try something new like a prison break or a heist. Or specials like a Christmas-themed adventure featuring Santa. These types of modules are great for standalone one-shots.
But beware, writer, for turning your idea into a module is not a path without risks.
The forces that influence the world of publication are powerful and unforgiving. One of these forces there is no hiding from or fighting. She will need to be pacified and sworn fealty to.
Her name, the law.
Before you even get to writing, be warned. It's a different thing to release fan material and to sell a product. Different game systems have different policies around third-party content. In 5th edition, not all spells, creatures, or items can be used. And there are some guidelines to follow, because terrible things happen to those who mess around with intellectual property.
It involves spiders, lots of spiders.
Trust me, you don't want to find out. So make sure you research that stuff thoroughly before and credit accordingly. But once you do decide on a concept, it's time to structure that big amorphous blob of ideas. I'm just gonna give you my default, but there's lots of different ways to go about it. And the examples I'm gonna show are from adventures I've written for the channel, not for the TTRPG studio, not for any reason other than because I actually own the rights to those. And the spiders. I don't want to mess with the spiders. By the way, all the adventures I've written as part of this channel are available online for the glorious price of free. So if you want to go take a look at them, you can find them in the description. I'm able to make them free thanks to some strange occurrences I still don't quite understand. There's a group of very strange figures watching me, seeing the strangeness that I get up to and deciding that they want to encourage bringing that chaos into the world. I don't know yet what kind of beings would want to enable my strangeness, but when I went to consult the tomes, I've been able to find the words Patreon members. Lucky for me, they don't bite. They're actually a pretty lovely bunch. And if you like what I do and want to support making more, maybe you might consider joining them. Especially since I've recently started working on this channel full-time. And you know, stability sounds good. Signing up grants one with a variety of boons. First, it gives you access to the Discord server of the channel, which is not a cult. Don't listen to them. It's not a cult. Legally. You also get a bunch of extra little things I make. Bloopers, some game content like puzzles or stat blocks, some behind the scenes stuff, or freebies like these Cypher Wheels printables you can use to decode secret messages. This month is also gonna be our first live stream to hang out with Patreon and Discord members, so come hang out. And let me also take this opportunity to thank these strange people that were brave and crazy enough to sign up to the Patreon, because you're the coolest. Somehow you seem to have faith in me and what I do, and that's so nice. Thank you a million times, you're incredible, but please, if anyone asks, it's not a cult. My default to structuring stuff is pretty classic. I'm not reinventing the guillotine here. Although I am going to immediately contradict myself and start with something that not everyone does. The first paragraph that I include is something I call a note on tone. It's really just a paragraph about atmosphere, giving the vibe of the adventure some guidance on the ambience. Beyond that paragraph just sounding cool, there's also a practical reason for it. In the adventure breakdown, the stress dimetry does not have time for flavor text, so I'm fronting this information on overall tone and flavor in this paragraph. One example could be if it's a murder mystery adventure where the distrust floating in the air is as a big theme. Maybe I'll talk about hushed whispers and paranoid glances among the NPCs. Alternatively, I've also used this section as a bit of narrative fluff text that you can just send to the players when you invite them to the game to set the mood. Here's an example from my one-shot Bloodied Embroidery, which had a bit of a true crime vibe to it. You can pause if you want to read it. Bloated river bodies. Anyways, then we get into the overview. This section gives all the core information, and just by reading it, the GM should understand all the ins and outs of the adventure. Meaning, I'm not structuring this adventure like a story where the big reveals come at the end of the PDF. No. The GM needs to know right from the start where all this is leading to. The 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, why. What's the situation like when the players enter, and how it could develop if they do nothing. I usually also add a section for the important NPCs, and I keep that list of NPCs short. If there's something we've learned as game masters, is that we shouldn't expect people to remember the names of 10 different NPCs, and we don't need their whole backstory unless it's relevant. What's their purpose in this adventure, and enough characterization that they're distinct and engaging characters to interact with. Vespera, aspiring musician, playing his instrument on the pier when he witnessed an argument between the victim and prime suspect. Smooth talking, cheap silk, and even cheaper cologne. Will clumsily and embarrassingly try to flirt with one of the player characters. Boom. Done. Next, the hooks. How do the player characters get involved? Even better if I can provide several hooks that the GM can pick from, because they know best which one is most likely to get their players to bite. Here's an example from my adventure, The Orchid Heist. I really wanted my players to start the game with a bag over their head and realize that their kidnappers are just tiny pixies trying to look tough. But that's not gonna work for every group. In a situation like that, some players choose curiosity and some players choose violence. So a range of possible ways for the party to be implicated in the adventure is good. Depending on the needs of the adventure, you might want to add more into the overview, maybe a timeline or a countdown, etc. The Orchid Heist included a big greenhouse-shaped dungeon, so I gave some kind of cheat sheet for the map that the GM could easily have on hand and refer to. Just if you're going to add something, make sure it's actually useful, and not just extra clutter that distressed Dimitri will have to sort through in the middle of a game. I'm not kidding you guys, he's so close to snapping. Let's move on to the adventure breakdown. This is where we get into the specifics. Break down every location, detail the encounters, the challenges. It's the bulk of the text, but that doesn't mean it should feel bulky. To make it digestible, like we said before, split everything into sections and subsections. Having clear formatting helps too, so I have a hierarchy of titles. Like a big title for a house, and then smaller titles for the rooms of the house. And every section gets a title. I try to keep each section to 1,000 characters, 1,200 maximum, spaces included. If it gets longer, either I wasn't concise enough in my words, or this paragraph should be split down into more sections. To give you an idea, when I was writing for that studio, for a one-shot adventure, they asked for 17,000 characters, including spaces. If you're wondering, it's not a lot. It could partly be because freelance TTRPG writers are often paid by the word count, not by the hour. That might actually be a very big part of the reason. But also, it's still a good exercise in being concise. Very concise.
Sometimes a paragraph isn't the best way to deliver information. Some situations might call for a table, bullet points, maybe even a diagram.
Try to think what is the best way to communicate and understand this information. Pay your due diligence to our goddess ergonomy. Paragraphs are haystacks. Hiding needles in there will draw her fury. But if in your paragraph you put the hostile creatures in bold and red, the GM doesn't even need to read the paragraph to find that needle. Just be sure that once you're set on that formatting, you keep it consistent throughout the whole text. As for writing styles, remember modules are not novels. Your goal is not to sound pretty.
Val actually writes adventures because she doesn't have the skill to write fiction.
I will throw that blood bag at your face.
No, you won't.
She has a point in that adventures are not the place for fancy writing. The other thing she said though, remember that Winifred is a liar and a bully and cannot be trusted. But modules seek not to seduce the reader with sophisticated prose and colorful metaphors. They strive for conciseness. They are clear, to the point, and easy to refer back to. The GM is the one who will narrate this story at the table, not us. The only time where I would actually write fluff is in the note on tone, like we said. But after that, it's facts, just the facts, only the facts. One thing that sounds a bit nebulous about adventure writing is how to account for the unexpected things that players might do. Should you list every possible course of action, every possible story path? It's important to provide several options for course of action, several ways that the players could progress the story, not just hitch them on a rigid path. But we don't want to fall into this dynamic. If the players do this, then do this. If the players do that, then do this, etc., 20 times in a row. Maybe give a few possible approaches to a challenge just so the GM knows how to help the players if they're stuck. But beyond that, there is no reality. None. In which you can anticipate everything the characters will do. Your job is to give a solid enough framework that if the players do something unexpected, as we hope they will because that's the beauty of the game, then you will have given Distress Dimitri enough information to make a decision on the fly. The only stuff you should try to anticipate is stuff that could entirely break the adventure. Like if you wrote a murder mystery adventure for levels 5 to 8 and someone shows up like, "Hey, I wanna cast Speak with Dead." What's that you say, corpse? Colonel Mustard is the one who stuck that big bad knife in your throat? Case closed, I guess. No. That's the kind of stuff you prepare for. So that these abilities can be rewarded with extra clues but not break your adventure. Over time you get better at anticipating this stuff, and until you get good at it, that's what proofreading and playtesting are for. Finally, we've got the resolution, or the epilogues. The bulk of it is going to include some possible endings or consequences depending on the player's actions and choices, rewards, whether they be in loot or valuable allies and contacts. You can also offer perspectives for future adventures. How an NPC they had positive interactions with could become a future patron or informant. I can't stress how important it is for an adventure not to corner the players into one possible outcome. Their decisions should matter and have an impact on the narrative and on the resolution, but that's not something that's exclusive to writing for publication. It's something we already strive for as GMs. You're not delivering a scenario with beats and lines to hit. You're delivering a framework, an initial situation that will get disrupted. And that was the basics of it. That being said, this is one structure and it's definitely not one size fits all. Maybe you might add an appendix at the end of your adventure for things like handouts for players. Sometimes the structure will be informed by the needs of the layout. Orchid Heist was structured into 5 tiers, so my goal was to make sure each tier of the game held in just one double-page spread. Using a fairly classic structure has some merits, because familiarity can be ergonomic. People know what to expect and know where to look and reference things. But if you're serious about wanting to get into adventure writing, read modules and run them, and don't be passive, engage with that process. Take note of how it's structured, of how easy it was navigating the document, or if it wasn't, why. On this, I will take my leave. That was a lot of information, and yet there is still so much to say about adventure writing for publication, but hopefully it should be enough to get you started, and you can let me know if you want to hear more about this topic. Also, my drink ran out. On this note, have a good evening, and may the spiders never decide to make you a target.